Next speaker is going to be Adam Steltzner from JPL. He's involved with in an important way with the Mars landing, and he's going to talk to you about how we hope it will be done.
Thank you very much. I apologize for not having prepared material. I've been busy as of late. Here we go. I have this lovely little app that rules my world right now. In 9 hours, 23 minutes, and 13 seconds, something's going to happen on the surface of Mars. Whether or not it's a good thing will be the result of the hard work and perhaps a bit of luck, but mostly the hard work and preparation of the team that I lead at JPL and other NASA centers around the nation. I am wonderfully lucky enough to lead what is the most talented, capable team to develop entry, descent, and landing systems that has ever been assembled. And that group of people have been working together for almost a decade. And the fruits of our efforts will be put to the test tonight in about 9 hours or so. So it's a slightly tense time. I say that I actually slept very well last night for the first time in literally years. My wife, Tricia, is there, and she can attest I was, not nearly as tossy and turny as I was, or am, typically. And that's because, for a large part, the die is cast. I mean, we have been putting subtle tweaks in, little change of parameter, change of software. That's been going on over the last several months, and occurred most recently yesterday afternoon. But we're now kind of inside the event horizon. And as you get closer and closer, it gets less and less wise to try and make it better, or even fix it, as you might think that you need to fix it. And we're now in the season or the time of just let it be. Yeah, well, it allows us to sleep, which is really nice. God, I haven't felt a morning like that in a long time. You guys are probably familiar with MSL's entry, descent, and landing system, so I won't bore you with the details. I've got a not that super long period of time I can be away from the lab right now, so I'll actually open it up to questions and take it from there. Yes?
Could you tell me the ballistic coefficient for this probe as it enters the top of the atmosphere?
Yes, the question was, could I tell him the ballistic coefficient? And the answer is yes, I can. And that number is about 155 kilogram meter squared. Yeah, you with the lanyard. Right.
A lot has been said about the complexity of the sky crane. How different is it from the tethers that were used on MER, which quite successfully?
Right. So a question, sky crane looks complex. How, compare and contrast with MER or Pathfinder. So you can think that, or actually it's true, that the lineage of the idea of the sky crane goes back through Spirit, Opportunity, Pathfinder, and the Sojourner rover, actually to tank delivery systems, artillery delivery systems that are used here on Earth by the U.S. Army, where they put in the parachute train, the set in the soft goods set that contain the parachutes, they started placing tractor rockets in the middle with a plumb bob below, because it was hard to reliably get enough chute out to slow the tank down enough so they wouldn't damage stuff on impact. You can put compressibles, crushables on the bottom underneath, and they do that. But they also looked at systems and deployed many systems with these tractor rockets in the middle of the train and a plumb bob. And when the plumb bob hits, the tractor rockets fire, arresting the last bits of velocity and taking it down to a safe impact speed. So the idea of multi-body tractor rocket for landing stuff goes back a ways. When the sky crane was being, the intellectual development of the sky crane is a choppy, piecewise, discontinuous. If you were to cut them all up and then pick up the scraps of film and edit it together, you could make something that looks brilliantly like a continuous arc of thought and totally reasonable. But that's not how historically and temporally it really occurred. The first idea was from Pathfinder, out of Pathfinder. Steve Jolly, Dara Sabahi, and Rob Manning said, hey, what happens if we just took away the airbags? Now that thing looks very much like the tank landing system, in that it would have a parachute, this middle body with tractor rockets, tethers, and then a rover. And that was called Rover on a Rope. The idea of steering that, controlling that was asserted to be impossible, and it was rejected. That process of looking for architectures was happening in the wake of the loss of the Mars Polar Lander and Mars Climactic Orbiter missions in the late 1999 and early 2000. The product of that effort was let's use MPF technique again and just put more rover inside the tetrahedron, and that became Spirit and Opportunity. While some of us, including myself, went off to do Spirit and Opportunity and were participating in that, the Mars Science, it was called the Mars Smart Lander, big rover, was using some of the other techniques that had been developed in the brainstorming in the wake of those failures. Something called a pallet lander, an airbag that you don't have a structure on, the airbag just wraps around the rover. And some of us who were working on Spirit and Opportunity were also helping on the side with these other developments. And they didn't go very well. And towards the end of somewhere in the 2003 timeframe, it would have been after launch, I believe. Yeah, so around launch, in the middle of 2003, I particularly hated the leading candidate for the Mars, big Mars rover was something called the Pallet, which I didn't like. And we got together to try and see if we could do better. And we had a big brainstorming session over 3 days. There were about 14 of us in the room. And over that period of time, we took a look at, challenged ourselves to look again at all the techniques that we discarded previously. And during that process, the rover on the rope came up. And we worked it further. We got rid of the parachute. We didn't make the rocket thing have to be the back shell. And we put the rockets on we said, let's take the rocket stage and drop it out of the back shell so you're not trying to steer the parachute. But then you were still steering this thing that had a very low frequency, right? There's a pendulum mode frequency associated with the length of the tethers that separate the bodies. And when you're on the parachute, you still have some residual gravity turn, you've still got some horizontal velocity, you got to cancel that. So canceling that and managing the horizontal degrees of freedom slaved to this pendulum frequency was tough. So then we said, well, maybe we could start with a shorter frequency and then lengthen it. And then let's drive that frequency to infinity by bringing it all the way up to and attaching it to the rover. And so through that set of days, that the idea of coming out of the back shell with the propulsion system attached to the back of the rover, flying as a single body, and then only once we'd done all the horizontal velocity cancellation, we were in vertical flight, then reconfiguring into the sky crane configuration. That was born out of those set of meetings. And for me, that is the fundamental difference between all of the predecessor stuff, which relied on the intrinsic aerodynamic stability of a heavy thing, a parachute, and something not that heavy in the middle, and the kind of work that we do with the sky crane, which is 100% actively controlled single body transitioning to the dual body system. Long answer to a short question. I'm going to go to this side of the room for a second. You.
Two questions. Is 10:31 p.m. the time the rover actually lands, or is it the time after the 14-minute lag that we should receive the signal?
It is the Earth receive time, the time after the lag that we receive the signal. So really 14 minutes earlier, 13.8 minutes earlier, something really happens.
My real question, in testing the sky crane, of course you had to do it in Earth gravity and Earth atmosphere. To make sure that the exhaust blast does not damage the tether of the rover, what adjustments, what process did you go through to adjust for what it actually will be like in Mars atmosphere and Mars gravity? Would that make a difference?
Yes, that was actually quite a challenge. The question is the threats due to the plumes of the MLEs, the Mars landing engines that we use. So that's a real tough one to get, right? We did vacuum chamber testing of the thrusters at the correct chamber pressure to understand the expansion. But we really, that chamber was not big enough to do the far field conditions. And so it was really computational fluid dynamics that were used to understand the pressure and, more importantly, temperature distributions of the plumes in the flight condition. So it was an analysis. There was not really an opportunity or a location where we could do far field plume testing. Yes, yellow shirt.
You guys are not using a plumb bob.
We are not using a plumb bob. We're using a radar. We're using 6-beam Ka band. Pulse pair Doppler is the technique that's being used. Radar. Narrow beams, 6 of them. We cycle through the beams, and we have different beam patterns. We cycle differently through the beams depending on where in the powered flight we are. Edge, longish sleeve, scruffy beard. Got to call it like I see it, man.
With this style of delivery system, how is there a good upper bound estimate on how much tonnage this style of landing system could deliver?
Okay, good question. Question is generically, I'll generalize your question, Tad, the scalability of this system, architecture, right? We think it's quite scalable. I don't know whether it makes sense much scaling down a lot, because there are some, you need a good inertial measurement unit, IMU, gyros and accelerometer set. You need a radar or another terrain relative navigation sensor, a range and velocity sensor. And so the idea of scaling it down much smaller, I'm not totally sure that makes much sense. I mean, to half the mass, not a problem. To a quarter of the mass, I don't know why you're going to go through all the complexity of all that instrumentation. On the upside, I think it scales very well. So the landing, the touchdown, is kind of a challenging thing in general. Legged landers have a fundamental sort of instability. They are thrust vector controlled. And so if I want to go in this direction, I tilt the vehicle like this, and it moves in this direction. So if you imagine landing on a slope really slowly, you come down, the leg hits, and that contact, very high impedance, very high stiffness contact with the surface, puts a moment disturbance in that tends to push you like this, which means you go away. And then you turn back to try and come back, and again, and so you tend to skitter. They tend to go and skitter about. Well, nobody likes that. No one has ever liked that. So you actually have never seen a legged lander that lands like that, because what they do is they come in, if they are doing it autonomously from far out in space, they come in hot, come in really fast, and during the impact event, before the control system can start to run amok, you detect that the impact has started to occur, and you kill the control system. And quite frequently by like brutal methods, right? You cut power to the propulsion system. And you do that with you opening up a relay or something, very drastic. Not like a please shut down, not like a soft shutdown. So, I don't like, this kind of scary to use that technique because that means you're looking for the onset, the very rapid onset of a signal that you're going to very quickly determine is this touchdown, and then you're going to take drastic action. And one of the most popular, but one of the Mars polar landers' potential failure modes is that during the deployment of the legs, they noticed a footpad sensor trigger, and they cut off their engines. So landing big things, legged landing, kind of hard. And even if you watch the folks nowadays, the space tourism privateers, the Marstons, the Blue Origins, etc., if you really watch slowly as they come down, you'll notice that they cut their engines just a little bit above the surface, or just a little bit. They may have very soft springs, and just as the legs have started to touch, but before a lot of weight has been taken up, they cut it. And so they'll always go, boom, right? So one of the things that we happen to love about the Sky Crane is it solves that problem. The descent stage gets to fly through the surface of Mars. Tension-only bridles, so they're locked together until the payload is taken up, and then this thing doesn't have to react quickly. It just keeps going down. We have little clock springs that wind up the slack, and the descent stage does not detect the touchdown event. It detects the post-touchdown state of the spacecraft. It's got seconds to do it. We've got enough clock springs in there. We could spend 2 seconds going down. I think we landed, did we? Wait, give me another little cup of coffee here. Yes, sure enough, I can't see the rover. She's not down there. Well, let's cut ourselves free and go away. So that post-touchdown state, clear and ambiguous, persistent state, we love that. Anyway, so if I were landing really big things, that would be an advantage. When you get into very large things, sometimes the mass scaling can be subtle. And I haven't really worked mass scaling at, let's say, 10 times the masses of 10 metric tons or 100 metric tons. And so I can't really speak to that. It might be a great idea, but I just haven't done any work in it. But for scaling up in the region of robotic science missions or supporting of human exploration, we think it's a viable architecture. Again, long answers to short questions. White shirt.
Best case, what are we going to see tonight, and when are we going to see it?
Best case scenario, you'll see a murky image of a new place on Mars by about 10:36 p.m. tonight.
And what's the latest it will run?
Worst case scenario, you will never see a new picture of a new place on Mars.
Will we see anything after the initial?
Yes, I'm being a little flip. In the middle there's a lot of cases that I prefer far to the worst case scenario. There will be a pass an hour later, or an hour and a half later by Odyssey, and there's an opportunity to get either the image that we took upon landing or images that we will have taken subsequently upon landing, but after Odyssey had passed out of sight. So the orbiters are in polar orbits. Typically, as they run over at the equator, you will get 2 passes, one usually better than the other, as they pass, they're slowly passing over, and you'll get one that's good and one that's not so good. So the next one that comes by is not quite as good, and we're still in a very high reliability, low bandwidth COM configuration there. But we will have an opportunity an hour and a half later, and then we'll have an opportunity the next day, morning, another 12 hours or so, another 2 passes.
So the pictures will be over about midnight at the latest.
12:30.
Okay.
Yes. And then blue shirt in front. I saw your disappointment about me not picking you. Yes.
So certified commercial aircraft go through a whole sort of failure modes analysis with equivalent levels of safety, 10 to the 9th in most cases, and lots of redundancy and lots of. So I know nothing about how
We don't do that.
Are your design constraints so tight that you just accept a vast number of single point failures as being, fatal?
Yeah, well, there's a rich conversation we can have on that. Complexity and reliability have interesting relationships to one another. I personally believe, Adam believes that that you pass through a valley on as you add on complexity. If you imagine plotting reliability, complexity, that your simplest systems may start at a sort of an innate level of reliability, which is driven by single device reliability generally, and that as you go to try and escape that single device reliability by adding complexity, first you go through a period where you lose reliability until you can finally make it through the dark valley and out to where the system is substantially more complicated, but that complexity is advantageous. For instance, I mean, we love the fact that commercial airliners, you can go to the flight computer and you can they got 3 flight computers, they're all running in parallel, pull one out, stick one back in, diddle it up, you can't even tell. That's awesome. We would love to do that with space-rated electronic equipment. Nobody's interested in doing that for us, and actually the complexity of trying to gin up something like that with about 25 or 30 people who are smart enough at JPL to do that kind of work, as opposed to several purpose-built avionics providers. Anyway, we choose to stay on this end of that curve. And my personal experience on this project makes me want to stay on that end of the curve also. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so in the case of like 6 radar systems,
Right.
you have like fallback.
So we have one radar. We have 6 beams, but they're not 6 individual. The digital electronics are shared amongst them. The power amplification is shared amongst them. It's only the transmit receive modules and the antennas that are individual. And so we have some level of redundancy. We could lose one of those beams. Some of those beams are losable, others are not, because we don't use all the beams all the time, and in different modes, some become very, very critical. But in general, we do not strive to try and have redundancy. Okay. Let's go over here, and blue behind the yellow.
2 blues in a row, great.
Yeah.
How much reserve fuel does it have? And is it designed to cut the tethers when the fuel runs out? And how far could it fall without big damage?
Okay. We have a lot of reserve fuel.
Seconds, minutes, hours?
Well, we burn at about, once the rover's off of us, we burn at about 3 kilos a second. And we have, let me do the math, we have 15, 20 seconds or so. Actually, no, that's wrong. We've got almost 30 seconds of fuel left. That's because we built this to go lots of different places, and it ends up being the scientists wanted to go to the bottom of Gale Crater, which is at minus 4.4 kilometers mola in Mars, which has got a nice, thick, soupy, density atmosphere compared to places that might be at +1. And so our terminal velocity on the parachute is substantially lower. We use less fuel. A lot of things broke our way with respect to the fuel. What we do once we cut ourselves free, once we notice that the rover is on the ground and it's no longer underneath us, we cut the vehicle free, and we fly a profile, attitude rate profile for 6 seconds. We don't try and burn up all the fuel, because when we look at what happens as we go to try and drain the tanks, when the fuel gets very low, you can get differential pull through the feed system, which can starve out some of the engines, and you can end up with big yaws and pitches, and so the thing can turn around and come back at you. We don't want to do that. So 6 seconds gets it 500 meters or more away, and that's plenty for us.
Good time for one.
Okay, back corner there.
Yes. I understand you have some Wolfram weights on board in order to correct the final trajectory, that at least what we discussed on our website.
Yeah.
Now my question is that why did you select this solution, and why is it Wolfram?
Okay.
What is it doing?
Good, so let me make sure I got the question right. So it's about the fact that we use tungsten masses as our, right, okay. Well, as you can see, I'm pretty much a simple man. I'm inclined towards simple solutions. And of the ones that we looked at for this was the simplest, most reliable solution that we thought of. And much is made about, we throw away 168.3 or 0.5, I forget the details there, kilograms of tungsten down low, and we throw away 145.5 prior to going into the atmosphere. That's a lot. That's almost 2 MERs. And so people say, my God, why don't you do science with that? Well, the good news is we are doing science with that. We make some fairly substantial craters on the surface of Mars when those things hit. And I'm not kidding, the scientists are very interested in looking at the craters because they know exactly when they were made, they know exactly the energy of impact that produced them, and so there's a great opportunity there for doing science. That's a convenient outgrowth of the fact that we have bright scientists who took a simple, stupid engineering solution and made something with it. But really the reason we did it was simply because it was bone simple and very reliable. Yes, okay. All right, thank you very much.